Hi, Adams. Happy Tuesday. I'm here with Chapter 13 of Beyond the Bright Sea. I carried the letter in my teeth until I was back in the house so I could pass the heavy muscle pail back and forth between my hands. Should I start calling you dog? Ash asked when I came through the door. I went straight to him with the letter, which he took from my teeth and held until I cleaned my hands on a rag and took it back. It's from the doctor, I said, putting it on the table. Ash poured the mussels and their brine into a pot. I went outside, pulled off my wet clothes, and pegged them on the line. The ones that had sun-dried were stiff with salt, but I whipped them against the rocks, salt rising from them in clouds, and put them on. Ash had left the letter on the table unopened. I knew that he wouldn't have read it, even if he could, without asking first. Do you want to know what it says? He was scrubbing the beards off the mussels and didn't look up from his work. I suppose I do more than I don't, he said. I read him the letter, working out the harder words easily because I'd already heard them from Miss Maggie, and then waited for him to say something. So you are not from Pennakees. I put the letter back in its envelope. That's what Miss Maggie said too, but I don't know. I think maybe I am. Ash stopped what he was doing, wiped his hands dry, and came to sit with me at the table. He looked at me intently. Why do you say that? I shrugged. Miss Maggie thinks I just want to be from somewhere, anywhere, even a leper colony, but it's not that. I rubbed my forehead with the heel of my hand. I guess maybe I'd thought about the possibility for so long that it feels true now, except it's more than that, and more than I could put into words. After a while, he sighed and wove his hands into a basket and said, You have to be more patient, Crow. What you're doing is confusing. Trying to figure out what's most important to you, what matters, what doesn't. It's all very confusing. I know, like standing in a hurricane. You have to find a way to step back a little, so you're looking at the storm and not caught up inside it. Otherwise, you might run headlong into something worse. I thought about that. Are you telling me to stop looking for my family? He closed his eyes. After a moment, he said, No, Crow, but I do think you should look in as much as you're looking out. I didn't know what he meant. I don't know what you mean, I said. Ash stopped to choose his words. Sometimes, he said, people know things. They don't learn them. They don't figure them out. They don't discover them. They know them. And it doesn't matter what anyone else has to say about it. He looked away. I ended up here because my country was not really my country. It was just where I lived, where some of us were less than others, where it was sport to hurt us. I waited as quietly as I could. Ash never talked about his life before the island. And in the face of that mindless, heartless, stupid rage, I could not protect the people I loved. I begged them to come with me, but they couldn't. So when I left everything I hated, I also left everything I loved, Crow, which split me into pieces like wood for the fire. And I did go into a fire for a while, he sighed. I had no English when I came to this country. I had no place to live, so I worked in factories making machines for so long that I felt like a machine myself. It was either that or starve. But eventually I chose starve. I chose a boat with a blue sail, so small and clean and quiet. I remember knowing in that way I'm talking about, and that it could take me to another life. He smiled at me, and it did, and not much later you came here the same way. But not because of what I knew, I said. I was just a baby. No, that's true. Something else brought you here, but you know it, whatever you might call it. He looked me in the eye. You can learn things from other people, and you can learn things by keeping your eyes open. But you can learn things from your own self, too, from what your gut tells you, if you pay attention to it, he said. But I thought you wanted me to stop being so curious. Ash sighed deeply. I did, he said. But what I want is the smallest part of this. I just don't like to think about you out there in the world by yourself. Then don't, I said, reaching across the table to put my little hand on his big ones. I'm not going anywhere. Dear Miss Evelyn, I wrote later that night on a piece of the special paper Ash used for his paintings. It was thick and beautiful, and I was careful to write slowly and clearly as I could. Dr. Eastman told me that I could write to you with more questions about Pennakees and the babies who were born there, Jason and Morgan. I stopped to lick the dry point of my pencil. I was tempted to write my story, how I had washed ashore in an old skiff, a ruined letter, and a ruby ring tucked into my swaddling. But if Miss Evelyn had any questions for me, she already knew my story. If she didn't, I saw no point in telling her my own private history. Without telling my story in plain language, I didn't know how to ask the next bit, so I just followed the pencil where it led. My questions are just words, I wrote. I wonder if they mean anything to you. I stopped again, read back what I'd written. If the paper had not been so dear, I would have ripped it up and started again. Instead, I wrote a list of words that might open any number of old doors. Baby, I wrote. Skiff, ring, little feather, lambs. I thought about the letter in the cinnamon box. Bright sea, I wrote, and came up short. 8 words, just 8. Almost not worth sending. I'm sorry if I sound foolish, I wrote. It's possible that I really am foolish. Thank you. And then, taking my cue from Dr. Eastman, I signed the letter. I remain, Crow. I didn't understand how I could remain anything except Crow, but the letter was done, so I folded it up and set it aside for the morning. Miss Maggie would know how to post it. This will cost you, she said, holding up an envelope. This and the postage. I nodded. Chicken coop? Muck it out and load it in fresh straw, she said. Put the muck in a barrow and cart it behind our barn. And then come on in for lunch when you're done. I would have done the chore for nothing, for payment for my lessons, for payment for my lunch, but Miss Maggie would never take any part for those things. Osh insisted on thanking her with the paintings, which she hung all around her house. Above her mantelpiece was a meadow full of sheep. Between her kitchen windows, a skiff riding the current through the narrows. The chickens liked me, as long as I didn't bring Mouse along. She didn't mean any harm, but the hens were a ferocious bunch, and they always greeted her arrival with a lot of running to and fro, squawking loud enough to wake the dead, and feathers flying everywhere. Stay out of here, I told her. She obliged me by flapping down in the sun and licking the back of one paw, which was her way of saying, fine, chickens smell anyway. It was pretty smelly in there, and dusty, so I pulled my shirt up over my nose while I worked. By the time I was done, I was sweaty and stuck all over with straw and feathers. I spent a moment at Miss Maggie's, dusting myself off and sluicing rainwater over my head, before I met her at the door. She handed me a rag. You seem to be dripping wet most of the time now, she said. Dry off before you come inside. Which I did, and quickly, too, at the smell of chowder on the stove. She set out 2 bowls for us, a teacup for Mouse by the door, and biscuits fresh from the oven. They were crisp on the outside, soft and steaming on the inside. Nothing better than to drench a hunk of hot biscuit through chowder thick with clams and potatoes. We ate in silence until Miss Maggie tipped her head toward the letter lying on the sideboard. For that nurse? I nodded. I hope you don't mind that I wrote it on my own. Miss Maggie snorted like Cinders did when he got a gnat up her nose. What teacher would mind when a student doesn't need her anymore? Oh, that's not it at all, I said. I need to learn lots of things. But how to write a letter is no longer one of them. She added some pepper to her chowder and offered me the mill. Do you want to read it? I asked. Is that an invitation? I nodded. There are things I haven't told you yet, I said, but I'd rather wait until after you've read it. I watched her open the letter. She raised one eyebrow as she read, and then both. This may be the shortest letter I've ever read, she said, and the most cryptic. What's that mean? Mysterious, she replied, puzzling. I imagined that Miss Evelyn in Louisiana might have the same reaction, so I said, what do you make of it then? Miss Maggie pursed her lips and read the letter through a second time. Well, she finally said, I know why baby is on the list, and skiff too, but why the rest, like ring and bright sea? So I told her about the ring and the ruined letter that had come with me in the skiff. I would have told you sooner, but I only just learned about them myself before we went to Penaquis. Miss Maggie nodded. I'm glad you trust me with your secrets, she said, and I'll keep them. She ladled some more chowder into my bowl and topped it off with a second biscuit. Now eat up, she said. There's not nearly enough meat on those bones of yours. Mouse had finished all of her chowder except for a cube of potato and a coin of carrot, which Miss Maggie saved for the pigs. As if a morsel of vegetable would kill you, she muttered. When Miss Maggie turned her back, I slipped Mouse a bit of pork belly from my bowl. She gobbled it down and chased a damselfly out the open door into the yard. You'll post this yourself, Crow, Miss Maggie said, tucking my letter into an envelope. Something I'd never done before. But I seemed to be doing a lot of things for the first time lately, and they'd come out all right so far. The post office wasn't much bigger than Miss Maggie's chicken coop, but smelled far better, despite Mr. Johnson's cigar. When he saw Miss Maggie come through the door ahead of me, he said, Well, good afternoon, Miss Maggie. What can I... But he stopped and said nothing more when I came in behind her and stepped up at the counter. I'd like to post another letter, I said, holding it out to him. He didn't take it. Maggie, he said, they sanitized the Pennickie's mail before they sent it off the island with formaldehyde, and I haven't gotten any of that. This is not Pennickie's, she said. Crow has lived here for years now. Are you really going to act this way, with God watching? Now that's not fair, Maggie, he said, when I've never been anything but decent to you. As if that has anything to do with it, she said. It's Crow who wants to post the letter, not me. I looked into Mr. Johnson's old blue eyes and said, I would like to send this to Carville, Louisiana, please. I set it on the counter. After a moment, he said, By airmail again, as before? I glanced at Miss Maggie, who nodded briskly. Else we'll grow old waiting for a reply, she said. She paid him for the postage, and we both watched as he managed to stick on the stamps without touching the envelope. As we left, I turned back in time to see him shovel my letter into a mail sack, his hand wrapped in newsprint. And I almost laughed, but I didn't. All right. So, I want to know, why do you think Maggie wrote this mysterious letter? Why didn't she just tell her questions out upright? Why did she have to write it in this weird format, kind of like a puzzle? I hope you guys have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye, Adams.